Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for coming here, and hopefully this will be a profitable time for you and for myself as well. Today I'm going to be talking about faith, and the title of my video here is Faith Alone is Dead and Useless for Salvation or Justification or Righteousness. Now if you're a Protestant you might say, oh, I think I disagree with that. Well, we'll take a closer look and see if by the end you maybe are in agreement. Hopefully you are. First of all, we're going to divide this up a bit and look at faith. So probably if you're a good Protestant, you know that what Paul says about faith. He says in Romans 3:26, we are justified by faith. And in Romans 4 verse 5, he says we are counted as righteous through faith. And then in Ephesians 2:8, he says that we are saved by faith. So faith is kind of an important thing. Now, all these things are through faith. Now, we as Protestants have kind of added to this. We've we went faith alone. So let's start with Luther. He added faith alone, and we've kind of kept that up, followed his lead. Now, even though it just says faith here, we took the liberty of adding faith alone. And that presents a problem because there's other verses in Scripture that say that faith alone doesn't make us righteous or justified or saved. So let's look at some of those verses. So let's look at James 2, and we'll just read some of those verses. Actually, we'll go to James 2 and read verses 14 and on. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or a sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is it? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. So James says here, faith by itself, or you could say faith alone, is dead. So when I wrote this title out, I wasn't making this up. I was taking this actually from James. Let's continue on. But someone will say, you have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? So here, James is saying faith apart from works is useless. And we'll skip down to verse 24. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. So in order to be justified, you have to have faith and works together. Let's look at another verse that would disagree with this faith alone concept. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 2. Just flip over there. If I have all faith so as to move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. So here Paul is describing a faith that is alone. He has great faith here, a faith that can move mountains, but doesn't have love. Now remember what Paul says in Galatians 5 verse 14. He says, the fulfillment of the law, let me read that. Galatians 5:14. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So here Paul says that without love I'm nothing. So you need love. You need to love your neighbor. So you need to be fulfilling the law. You cannot love your neighbor without fulfilling the law. They are together. And so now we'll look one more place where it talks about faith alone will not get you saved. Okay, we'll look at Matthew 7 verse 21. So this is talking about the judgment. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. But on that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many miracles in your name? So here some people are, when at the end of time, when we're sitting at the judgment, Jesus tells them, you have to do the will of my Father or you won't get into heaven. You won't get into the kingdom of heaven. And their response is, when God's not letting them in, is to say, oh, look, but we've cast out demons. We did miracles. We prophesied in your name. We should be getting in. And why are they saying that? Because if you look at, for one thing, casting out demons, what did Jesus say to his disciples when they couldn't cast out a demon? He said that they lack faith, so they had to have more faith. So these guys are saying, look, we were casting out demons. We had faith. And actually, if you look at Mark 16, and verse 17, it says, and these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will cast out demons, they will speak in new tongues, they will pick up serpents with their hands, and if they drink any deadly poison, it will not hurt them. And they will lay their hands on the sick, and they will recover. So here, Jesus is saying that these signs are going to accompany those that believe. So those who have faith are going to be able to do these signs. So these people are pointing to these signs that they're doing and saying, look, we have great faith. And so they sound like Protestants, really, don't they? Because they're saying they're looking to their faith to get them into heaven. And what does Jesus say is going to happen there? He says, and I shall declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. So you people who do sin, you people who break my law, if you're breaking God's law, you will not get into heaven. So it's not just faith alone, it's faith plus keeping God's law that's going to get you into heaven. And if we look at verse 24, Jesus expands on this and says exactly what he means, exactly what he's meaning here. He says, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. So this person, if you want to get into heaven and not hear depart from me, you have to do the works that Christ talks about here in the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, so we seem to have a bit of a problem here, don't we? We have Paul saying that we're justified, made righteous, we're saved by faith. And then we have these other verses where James and Paul himself and Jesus say, no, we are justified, we're going to get into heaven, we're saved, we're made righteous, not by faith alone, but by adding obedience, doing God's laws, loving our neighbor. And so there seems to be a contradiction here. So we have three choices here that I've listed here. So we can say Paul is contradicting Jesus, James, and himself. Now, for most of us, that's probably not an acceptable thing to say, because we think all Scripture is God-breathed and it all works together. So we're not in favor of saying, oh, some of Scripture is saying one thing and some is saying another, and we're all right with that. And that was basically Luther's position. When Luther came up with the idea of faith alone, he realized that James disagreed with that. And so what was his solution? He said, well, James is a book of straw, so really it shouldn't be in the Scriptures even. So that's why, of course, so he said, yeah, it's faith alone, and James doesn't know what he's talking about, basically. And also he said Matthew, Mark, and Luke are inferior to the book of John. So that was Luther's way of saying he's right, faith alone is right, these other things, what these guys are saying is not important. Now, of course, most of us today, as Protestants, don't think that James is a book of straw and Matthew, Mark, and Luke are inferior, and so we're not throwing them out of the Bible or want to, or even say that they're inferior. Instead, the other choice that we do is we could twist these verses. So that's basically what we as Protestants have done. So when it comes to James, and he said we hear a lot of people say, well, James was speaking to a certain people that doesn't apply to us today, or you say the justification that James is talking about is a different kind of justification. It's a justification before men. And so, of course, there's no basis for this, but in order for us to align these two, we have to twist those scriptures to make them line up. And it's the same with Matthew in Matthew 7:21. They would say, where it says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. They'll say, well, the will of the Father, if you read in John, is that everyone believes. So we just need to believe. So they don't look at the rest of that passage that clearly shows, no, we have to walk in obedience. And so that's kind of the method most of us Protestants use. We just twist these verses. Now there's a third choice, and that is our understanding of what Paul means by faith the problem? Maybe the issue is we don't understand what Paul is talking about here. And so that's why these two things seem to contradict. In this video, I hope to prove in detail that Paul's use of faith is actually the same as Jesus, James, and himself. So what I'm planning on doing in this video is to prove to you from what Paul said that he is actually not saying faith alone, but he is actually saying the exact same thing that James and he said in Corinthians and Jesus said. It's actually faith plus something. And I hope to in detail show you how that's true. And let me just start off by, let's look at Hebrews 11:6, because here we have a definition of what faith is. Hebrews 11:6. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. For whoever would draw near to him, now listen here, there's two things they have to do. They must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So when we look at what the scripture, how it defines faith, how the author of Hebrews defined faith, faith has two parts. It's believing he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So there's the element of seeking after him. And we'll look into detail what that means in a future video. And during this lesson, I want to do an illustration that will kind of show the point that I'm trying to get across here. And here's some baking soda, and it represents faith. So I've put some in a glass here. And so I want to, throughout this lesson, we're going to keep an eye on this faith. This is faith alone. And to see what happens to this faith alone. Now the next part of the lesson, I want to look at the Old Testament and show how the people in the Old Testament were made righteous. And I'll just look at one more verse before we go there. It's in 2 Timothy 3:16. All Scripture, so when he talks about all Scripture, he's talking about the Old Testament, is breathed out by God and is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. So here's the last part. The Old Testament is profitable for training in righteousness. So if we want to know how to be righteous, we can look at the Old Testament, and it can train us how to be righteous. And so that's what I plan to do in this in the next part of the lesson. Thank you very much.